All righty. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our NAMI San Antonio General Meeting for July. Thank you all for joining us today. We're excited to have you here. Before we get started, I am going to, let me introduce myself. My name is Shelby Thomas. I am NAMI San Antonio's intern, and for today, I will be your moderator. Before we get started, I just want to go over some housekeeping rules. So for our attendance, we would appreciate if each attendee would enter in their first name and their zip code into the chat. This helps us with our attendance, and one of our staff will be tracking that. So please, as you come in, if you come in later, please enter your first name and your zip code into the chat box. And please also be mindful of muting your devices, whether you are on your phone or your computer, just to be respectful of our speakers. And also, if you have questions with our speakers, you can enter that into the chat as well. Okay. So our agenda for today, we're going to start with a hearty welcome from our president, Doug Beach. We'll talk about the current awareness of this month. We'll have an introduction of each presenter, and then the presenters will speak. So we're going to do one presenter at a time. We have three lovely presenters today. So they're going to go one at a time, and we will do an introduction of each speaker. There will be a question and answer at the end of each presenter's presentation. So we'll allocate about 5 minutes for the attendees to ask questions. So please remember to type it in that chat box, and then I will read them out for the presenters to answer. And then after that, we will do our closing. Okay, and with that, I want to introduce our president, Doug Beach, and he'll give you a nice welcome.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in today, for attending via Zoom, our monthly NAMI membership meeting. It's midsummer. We've made it about halfway through the year, and appreciate everybody kind of coming to the meeting in the middle of your summer. July is Minority Mental Health Awareness Month, and that's going to be the focus of our program today, which you'll hear a lot more about. I also want to make a couple announcements. As many of you know, our Education Director, Carol, is going to be going off to RV land. She promises me she's going to stay in touch, but I think that's going to be virtually for a while. And we are going to do, we're taking applications for that job, and it'll be titled Program Director. And we're going to be posting that on the NAMI website. It's not out there yet. We'll post the job description and an application form. So anybody that is interested, it'll be out there, and we welcome any and all applications. And with that, I want to turn it back over to Shelby.
All righty, thank you so much, Doug. All righty, so just another reminder, please enter your first name and your zip code for our attendance into the chat box. And please remember to mute yourselves as others are speaking to minimize any distractions. And with that, I would like to talk about our volunteers. So NAMI really depends on their volunteers. We love our volunteers. It's a great way to get plugged into a supportive community for a great cause. So when you join NAMI as a volunteer, you become part of America's largest grassroots organization dedicated to improving the lives of persons living with serious mental illness and supporting family members and others who care. So if you go onto NAMI-SAT.org, you can go under our Get Involved panel, and you'll see a volunteer panel as well. And there is a very friendly fillable version to fill out a volunteer membership form, and that will be sent to the appropriate person to process, and they will be in contact with you. So if you're thinking about becoming a volunteer and becoming a part of a really great group and a really great system, please consider being a volunteer with NAMI San Antonio, and we greatly appreciate your service with us. So as Doug mentioned, July is Minority Mental Health Awareness Month, and we have some links that are from the NAMI national website that you can check out and read more about. So you can screenshot this slide where you can see different links and different PDFs about minority mental health awareness. Once again, before we introduce our speakers, I just want to reiterate about entering your first name and your zip code into the chat for attendance. So as you're going in and out, please do that. Please remember to keep your phones and laptops muted during when the speakers are speaking. And when you want to put any questions in for the speakers, please enter that into the chat box, and I will be able to read those towards the end of each presenter's presentation. All righty, and without further ado, our President Doug Beach will be introducing our first speaker.
Thank you. It's really a pleasure to welcome Clarissa Aguilar. She's a licensed clinical psychologist and behavioral health consultant in primary care at the Center for Healthcare Services, CHCS. She also serves as the Director of Psychology and Training at CHCS. She holds a double appointment as an associate professor at the Long Medical School at the University of Texas, and in San Antonio in the Department of Psychiatry and the Department of Community and Family Medicine. Dr. Aguilar supervises and trains psychology residents, master's level students, and other interns in primary care psychology. So it's really, we're lucky to have her today, and thank you for being here, Clarissa.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very honored to be here, to be talking about Latino mental health, something that's very close to my heart. Thank you so much, everyone. I appreciate it. So today I was asked to talk about the aspects of mental health and mental illness as it relates to the Latino culture. So we're gonna have, you'll hear a lot of different things today. I'm gonna go over some statistics, talk about some information related just to mental health in general, and then talk a lot about the perspective of mental health from the Latino culture. So next slide, please. As we all know, the Latino population is a growing population. On the left, we have kind of the breakdown of all the different Latino groups and subgroups in the United States. And on the right, you'll see the growing population of the Latino population in the US. Lately, you all may have heard the term Latinx. I know to me that is something that's new and different. The Latinx culture really also represents, Latinos, Latinas. It really just is a gender neutral term that helps people understand that you can be a Latino, a male, or a Latina, female. And sometimes people get confused about the origin of these terms. So just to kind of explain, the term Latino actually refers to the geography of Latin America, which includes individuals from the Caribbean, from South America, and from Central America. So it's a very large, it captures a large part of the geography. And Hispanic is actually a term that's based on this language that is being spoken. And so traditionally, I guess for a long time, we have heard the term Hispanic, but in more recent years, people have become more comfortable with the word Latino and now using the word Latinx. But I really want to point out and make sure that everybody understands that the Latinx culture is very multiracial, it's multicultural, very diverse. It's very important to understand that we are very different and everybody grew up differently. I think in a sense, people kind of know this, but overwhelmingly in the US, the largest proportion of Hispanics in the US are Mexican or Mexican American, making up about 60 to about 65% of the US population. Next slide. So just to kind of dive right into it, this was a survey on drug use and health, which is a department that is sponsored by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration, which highlights mental illness and substance use disorders and this is specifically focusing on the Latino population. So what we know, unfortunately, is that about 3.4%, about 1.4 million Hispanics have both a substance use disorder and a mental illness. And so we understand that this is a prevalent condition in our community. There are struggles with substance use disorders as well. And what we know, I guess, this always makes me wonder, well, what are we doing about it? How are we treating or helping our people? So if you go to the next slide, you can kind of see this also talks about the increase in serious mental illness among Hispanics. And on the right, you'll see that even though about half of the population did get treatment, 51.2% that have a diagnosis of a serious mental illness did not get treatment. And so these are some of the health disparities that have become very troubling and some of the things that our nation is finally paying attention to. If you go to the next slide, you'll see that while there is availability of mental health services, Latinos or the Hispanic population tends to, they're much less likely to access mental health services. 1 in 10 Hispanics with a mental health disorder access services through their general practitioner or in primary care. And you may have heard Mr. Beach describe my particular role is I'm a psychologist in primary care. And for this specific reason, I decided to move into primary care because I realized that this is where my people are accessing services. And the best way to help increase access to mental health is to be in the place where most Hispanics are accessing those kinds of services. Only 1 in 20 Latinos access specialized services from like a private practice psychologist. So we know these slides kind of highlight the disparities in our mental health services and in the systems that we have. There are many of us who are working really hard to try to equalize those disparities. One of these ways in doing that is through integrated care, but it's also important that if you are a clinician, if you are, I guess no matter what your background is, if you know Spanish, if you were taught Spanish, if you took those high school Spanish classes, really try to put them into place because there is a lack of culturally tailored treatment and bilingual therapists in the US. We do fairly well here in San Antonio, but we still do need more help with all of that. So if you go to the next slide, I kind of just wanted to switch gears and talk about some of the cultural values that are actually, from all the research that we know about Latinos, these cultural values are very protective in terms of helping foster mental health. But at the same time, we've understood over the years that when we adhere so strongly to our own culture, sometimes it makes it difficult for us to adapt to the larger American culture in which we are living and in which we are embedded. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. But these are some kind of traditional Latino cultural values, and some of you have probably heard these terms before. Some of you may not have heard the terms, but understand exactly what I'm talking about when I say that the Latino culture is known for having a very collectivistic, family-oriented, interpersonal style. Latinos tend to think in terms of groups and what is good for the group instead of thinking individually. And that's one of those clashes where it can start to become very stressful. There might be a lot of psychological distress thinking about how you might succeed in an American culture when you come from a culture and from a family and from a system that valued group. And that's one of the things, my family and I talk about all the time. Respeto, which is respect, right? Having a lot of respect for our elders is something that's very important culturally. Personalismo, which is striving for a personal connection in interactions and having a deep, meaningful connection as you're talking to someone or when you're meeting someone. That's a very important aspect of the culture. And in our training, we often talked about how important it was when we were meeting with Latino families to make sure you do try to make that connection. Related to personalismo is simpatia, which is also kind of like a sympathy or what we might refer to as empathy, or being able to connect to someone with compassion. You might say entendimiento, like we understand one another. And it kind of conveys a solidarity or a joining of joining with the other, which can be very helpful to help people feel seen, heard, and understood. And that's one of the key hallmarks of helping people heal, as we know. And so these are some of the cultural values that are in play in the Latino culture. I put in paternalism as another piece because in Latino culture, we tend to, the parental authority tends to persist over the lifetime. There's not necessarily this, although there is, some independence that gets created, there tends to be a lot of closeness to the family and to the parental figures as well, even as time goes on. So next slide. So what I wanted to depict in this particular slide, if you look at it closely, is that Latinos definitely feel overwhelmingly connected to their race and ethnicity. So some of these cultural values actually would play a bigger role for people who identify as Latino, and it becomes a larger part of their identity. So this was a poll that was conducted by the Pew Research Institute, and they kind of pointed out that Hispanics, 71% of them feel very strongly connected to their ethnicity, as opposed to white Americans, where only 36% of them felt very connected to their race or ethnicity. And so there really is this very strong connection to who we are as a culture. And these values that I just talked about could really play into the way we see ourselves and the way we see the world. Next slide, please. So for those of us who are Latinx, I just wanted us to kind of take a moment to think about what our culture has told us growing up about mental health, right? And what messages did you receive? And if you like, you can put that into the chat for a moment. If you want to answer this question, you definitely don't have to. But I just wanted us to think about this for a little bit. You've probably heard the term or the phrase, when you're a fish, you don't notice the water that you're swimming in, right? Because it's something that's just part of who we are. And I see some people kind of chiming in that really want to bring this to consciousness, right? Please, keep things to yourself, keep things private. One of the things I think that is very prevalent in our culture regarding women especially is to suffer in silence, right? Pray your troubles away. And not, even if you are experiencing pain or sorrow or grief or hurt, to try not to express it or burden others with how you're feeling. And this is something that actually has been studied quite a bit in the research literature. While there is something that is maybe very internally, someone might even feel powerful, being able to withstand or aguantarse, that's kind of the way we say it in Spanish, aguántate, like you can put up with it, be stronger. What we know and what I've become a big advocate for is trying to make room in our families and in our relationships with the people that we love to communicate some of how we feel and to talk about how we feel, even if it is painful. We should not interpret that as burdening others. We are connected to one another. And so it's important that we really try to help our health by discussing it and bringing it to the surface. I always tell people, if you don't directly communicate what you are feeling out loud, your body will speak for you. And so we see that over and over in our clinics, that our bodies will take on the pain and will communicate the pain when we are not communicating that verbally. We know that the mind-body connection is so strong that physical symptoms appear right away. And so I guess the other thing I wanted to make sure I talked about is sometimes in our families, we like to connect to one another by having this very silent connection or a connection without words, meaning that we understand what is happening. we don't really need to talk about it because that's how tight we are. That's how well we know each other. And while that feels so good in some ways, we have to be careful with that, because if we are suffering in silence too much, it can hurt us. And so use the bond between you to make it verbal and to make it explicit. And that's challenging because depending on how we grew up, we may not be accustomed to that. Culturally, it may not be something that we are used to doing. And it might be more of an American thing to kind of stand up for yourself and say something. But the more we keep things under wraps, there is a tendency for shame to start to build, or for this idea that because we haven't said anything, it becomes a secret. And maybe it's something we should be ashamed about, or something we should feel guilty about. And I just want to make sure everybody kind of has permission to talk about how they're feeling, no matter, you know, what culture you come from, but especially if you're a Latino or Latina. Okay, next slide. So when I was growing up, we heard some of these things, and this might be some other ways that you have kind of heard about some messages about mental health. My grandpa always used to say, and I don't know if this is like a grandpa thing or just a Mexican thing, but he always used to say, vivir es sufrir. So to live is to suffer. And it was kind of like something that was taken for granted. It's something that he said his family members always told him. And, you know, think about that now, like, wow, what a message that is about mental health and about the way we should live our lives. And so I think we have to maybe question sometimes some of the cultural messages that we get. Al mal tiempo, buena cara, meaning put on a good face, make sure, you know, you're smiling through it. Again, something to kind of question and think about. This next quote kind of talks about the importance of the social connectivity and the way that messages about who we are as a person get communicated to our culture and to our community. Dime con quién andas y te diré quién eres, right? So that kind of means tell me who you're hanging out with and I'll tell you who you are. Those are kind of things that are very important, and things that I kind of heard growing up, little warning signs, like little messages. And then another one to kind of, I think I couldn't have this conversation about mental health and Latinos without talking about food, because food is so tied to our culture, to our celebrations, to our happiness, to our grief even. And this says, you know, barriga llena, corazón contento. Kind of meaning like when our stomach is full, our hearts are happy, right? And I think that speaks to maybe some of the way that we get together and celebrate one another. It speaks to the way that we try to celebrate accomplishments. And even that, like I said, I think these days I really try in my practice in primary care to make sure people are, you know, choosing healthy things, celebrating in a healthy way, so that things like diabetes don't come into factor. But if you can go to the next slide. This was a great slide I actually got from the American Psychiatric Association, who talked about how some of these cultural values get played out and some of the differences that get played out in different families. And so again, what we know, what all the research has told us, is that being bicultural and being bilingual is actually a protective factor for the Latinx population. So being able to navigate two different cultures is important. Being bilingual allows us to communicate with our family and to deeply connect, maybe in a more emotional way, to our family. Even though at one point, it's not this way anymore, but at one point, being bilingual was thought of as a disadvantage. And it caused kind of a lot of discrimination in the past. Thank goodness now we're at a different point in time that we know that being bilingual is helpful, and it's definitely helpful for our youth. But being bicultural, non-linguistic aspects of bicultural competence in the child and in the family also serve a very protective role and have positive outcomes. So if you wonder, what do I mean by non-linguistic aspects of bicultural competence. I'm talking about these sorts of things, having to have respect for parental authority, thinking about the spiritual domain, having indirect communications. So, in some ways I'm saying, well, these are all really prevalent cultural norms. You're also telling me I should be careful. What do you mean? If you go to the next slide. Oh, well, these are some of the ways that our culture actually presents or expresses some of our distress. So that some of these terms you may have heard before, some you may not have, but I do want to be sure that if anybody maybe hears these terms that they don't get confused or don't think that, I think the tendency is for people to think like, oh, if you're saying you have cholera, there's maybe something very wrong or you need to be hospitalized, but these are actually cultural expressions that tend to categorize certain kinds of symptom presentations. So ataque de nervios is a term that sometimes we've heard people talk about in the clinic, which is characterized by intense emotional upset, high anxiety, maybe bouts of anger, attacks of crying, shouting or screaming. Sometimes it's related to something that is specifically happening, like an event. Sometimes it might have happened because of something interpersonal or a conflict that occurred. Susto is another cultural syndrome that is comes from a very frightening event and can be characterized by feeling very tired, feeling very weak, or having some kind of event that startled you and just haven't been able to feel the same since. There is some correlation between these top two, between susto and ataque de nervios and PTSD. So these are things for clinicians to be aware of. Mal de ojo, which I'm sure some of you all have heard about as well, is the evil eye. And sometimes people can feel sick, feel very tired. They might have a fever, start vomiting, have some depression or anxiety because of someone giving them the evil eye. This is something that people have at times come into the clinic talking about. And again, it's something not to dismiss, but to really think about in the context of the culture, because there are also steps that people take to protect themselves from the evil eye. And, that might include wearing like a little locket or a particular bracelet, things like that, or even kind of curing sorts of ceremonies that people have conducted. And so again, those are all fairly normal within the bounds of the culture and shouldn't be characterized as something that is mistakes for an illness. There's also a wind or cold illness. Sometimes people are very fearful of the cold or of the wind or catching an illness from the cold or wind. So I just kind of wanted to call people's attention to that. So next slide. This is kind of, well, what do we do about all this? I'm telling you to be careful. I'm telling you, well, these are some of the ways things can get expressed. I'm telling you that the Latino culture has some very valuable things like familismo, these non-linguistic factors in our culture. But at the same time, I'm also saying that there are some of the message we got that we've received may not be so positive for us. So what can we do? So what I would say, what all of these different points really try to encapsulate is that to take the mindset of both and. So what we know and what all the research would tell us about being bicultural, being Latino, is really trying to balance and incorporate our Mexican culture or our Latino culture together with American values. That's kind of maybe the best way, or that has shown to be have the best mental health outcomes for individuals that come from a bicultural background. What happens, or I guess maybe some of the tendency is to reject our culture and to throw away everything and every tradition that we come into the world with. And what I would say is having a that kind of mindset is actually not healthy, because who we are, is embedded in our culture, and these cultural messages are important. So while I'm saying yes, very much pay attention to some of these things, but be careful. What that means is that to figure out a way that you can hold both your Americanness and cultural pride together. And sometimes that blending is very challenging. Sometimes it's very difficult. I know personally in my particular family, it's something that we struggle with all the time. But one of the ways we try to do that is we really emphasize that the boys learn Spanish, even though I, speak English and Spanish. My husband speaks English and Spanish together. So we really try to emphasize the language, but then we also try to create a space that people feel, or the kids feel like they can talk about how they feel. We really try to encourage the discussion of any kind of physical symptoms to see if that can maybe alleviate some of those things. I know that, again, normalizing rest is a big thing. A lot of us were raised with the idea that we have to keep working. I think that's where my grandpa got this idea that living is suffering because you're always working and you're never resting. But another way to try to balance some of that is to also balance rest so that we don't overdo it. So, I'm really trying to find a way to incorporate some of your culture into your daily practices and into your daily life as a way to make sure you're doing both. Because we are living in the US, there's so much US culture that we get infused by daily. Our perspective is informed by all of that. So trying to hold on to our culture is a way to help maintain our mental and our physical health. So that's kind of the takeaway, both and, right? Think about both and together. And trying to hold room in your identity for both. So that about wraps up. I want to know if there's any questions. I'd be happy to take any.
Thank you, Dr. Aguilar. From Elaine, she says, thank you for sharing, Clarissa. It means a lot to me.
Oh, you're welcome.
There is a question about stigma. So how has the stigma changed over the years? Is your culture more accepting of mental health disorders in today's day and age?
Yeah, I do think, how do I say, I hope I'm right. I am kind of representing everyone here. But what I'll say is I think in general, across the nation, there has been more acceptance of, and a push towards mental health and mental wellness, and as that being an important factor in the way that we live. I think for so long, the mental world was just not anything anybody ever talked about. And specifically, I would say in our culture, even more so for Latinos. I think that now there's like a whole new generation. I know when I heard the term Latinx, I thought that meant the younger generation, but I was like, no, it's referring to me too. So, but I guess what I'm saying is that there has been an advent of this awareness of so many things, like systemic racism that affects the services that we are trying to access. There's a voice being given to people, I guess even like myself, that my parents experienced a lot of discrimination and racism for speaking Spanish. So we weren't taught Spanish, but I thought it was really important to learn Spanish. So there really is a very I don't know. I think there's been a shift, and especially in the last few years, I would say yes, there's some lessening of the stigma, but we still have a long way to go.
Thank you. Carmen asks, why do fathers have a more difficult time to accept mental illness?
Yes, Carmen, that's a good question. I think that, perhaps your question comes from the perspective of, I mean, I guess I can answer as a psychologist myself. I think in our culture, Latino men have a lot on their shoulders, and that is a kind of the added burden of if women are expected to suffer in silence, men are expected, not to suffer at all. And there's this idea that you can't really show weakness, you can't show any kind, a demonstration of feeling sometimes might equal something like a weakness. And I know that that's been that's a very difficult correlation to untie. You kind of have to uncouple that and help maybe not just fathers, but I think, some mothers too that I've encountered understand that somebody's experience is legitimate, even though it's not their own. And that takes a lot of time. I know that when I did a lot of work with families in Los Angeles County, specifically Spanish-speaking families and Latino families, we would spend a good, hour with a child, an individual or a teenager, and then a good chunk of the time, another hour really spent with parents to help them understand, not necessarily about illness, but of this perspective taking. I think parents work so hard to provide for their children and to give them so much. And I guess that's what I heard over and over. I don't understand how they could be feeling this way when they have everything, right? And maybe now I've heard this, I might have said the same thing myself as a parent. But Carmen, I guess I have a lot more to say about that too. So if you wanted to email me, we could discuss that more.
Thank you. Thank you. We have some sweet comments in the chat from CJ. She said, I love being seen, heard, and understood. And from Ashley, she said she absolutely loves your presentation. As I'm sure all of us agree, we loved your presentation. So thank you so much. We're going to wrap up our questions for now. I know Dr. Aguilar had some resources that we can discuss.
Yes, and so these are actually just help you access lots of different resources for Latinos related to mental health. I am also from the Center for Healthcare Services, and we have a ton of resources as well. So I can get specific resources to the center, and these are more general that you can access on the web as well. Oh, I did add in a few, I don't know how many clinicians we have in the audience, but if there are any clinicians, there are some great resources from the Office of Minority Health that has some great training on the class standards that were recently renewed and cultural competency, which I've taken myself, and they're great.
All right.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, and we'll have Doug introduce our next speaker.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to introduce Reverend Veronica Blue. She is the co-pastor of Family Life International Ministries, along with her husband, Bishop Alfred Blue Jr. And Veron, in her notes that she gave to us, I'm going to read a few things that she said about herself, and that gives you a little bit of a picture about Veron. She said she's a very passionate person, passionate about her relationship with the Lord, with her family, and her husband of 30 years, her sons, her daughters, and her church family. She's also passionate about people in the community, as she's been involved with different community organizational programs dealing with substance use, HIV/AIDS, and drug education for youth for the past 30 years. She's also passionate about empowering girls, not only in the United States, but also in South Africa, the Bahamas, Nigeria, and Trinidad. She's currently working with the Bridges to Care group and her cohort, the Rafa cohort, which is a collaboration of 7 churches to help educate and empower the community in mental illness. She's engaged in a popular weekly program that's grown out of that called Trauma Talk, which is designed to talk one-on-one with the community about their mental health. So welcome, Veron, and it's wonderful to have you with us.
Well, thank you, Doug, and thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to share with you today what's happening and the opportunity to hear from Dr. Clarissa. That was such an excellent presentation. Thank you so much. I was educated, and that's what this is all about. So thank you for doing a great job. And I look forward to hearing you, Miss Elaine. I also do that. So thank you for the opportunity to come on and share what's happening in my community where mental health is concerned. As Doug said, I'm passionate about what I do, and I'm extremely passionate about mental health in my community, in our community, and in our city. So first, I want to take a quick look at the state of mental health in America. Then we'll take a look at what's happening in the African American community. According to the Mental Health Organization, America organization, anxiety and depression has skyrocketed. Thoughts of suicide and self-harm are higher than ever. Young people are struggling the most with their mental health. About 2 in 5 people who are incarcerated have a history of mental illness, and suicide is the second leading cause of death for people ages 10 to 34. Next slide. In African American communities, mental health is oftentimes vastly different for us. Mental illness is often undiagnosed or misdiagnosed in my community. We are overrepresented in jails and prisons. We make up 13% of the population, but nearly 40% of the prison population. African Americans are more likely to go to prison for mental health illnesses than any other group of people. So 50% of adults with serious mental illness do not receive the treatment according to Mental Health in America study. And 90% of African Americans over the ages of 12 with a substance abuse disorder never receive treatment. We are more likely to go to the emergency room rather than go see a mental health specialist. And I'm going to share some of the reasons why this persists and exists in our community. So what's right about my community? Let's talk about what's right. We have strong family relationships, strong bonds of intimacy and friendship and laughter and joy. And we have strong relationships, family relationships. We also have deep spiritual connections to God, the church, our faith community. And so we spend a lot of time in church. You'll find that out in the Black community. We love to sing and dance, and we have deep spiritual connections to God. And then we are resilient people. My friend, neuroscientist, Dr. Sunita, she said, you have resilience in your DNA. And so we have all of these tools that are necessary, and we are able to overcome trauma and the issues, some of the issues of mental illness. So, but we do not have a language to communicate what we are feeling. We are unable to describe, what is this? We describe depression as, oh, I have a backache or my bones hurt, but we can't say that is a result, that is depression. And there are 4 ways we can walk with each other in community. We can do face-to-face where which implies confrontation and judgment. And I cannot heal you if I judge you. We can walk in front of each other, pulling you along, saying, I know what's best for you, just follow me. Or there's a 3rd way, we can walk behind, which insinuates pushing you, pressuring you, you're moving too slow. Or we can simply walk side by side, which is a common shared mutuality. We look at the world together from the same side. It's interesting that I'm able to hold your hand much more comfortably if I'm standing next to you, as opposed to in front of you or behind you or directly in front of you. And so Bridges to Care, this organization, has a model that is bringing about a new day for African Americans in mental health. It's making a difference in our communities, our homes, our places of worship, our city. And so what's wrong? We are not talking in the African American culture. We don't talk about mental illness, simply because we didn't have the language. It's stigma. It's a stigma to tell someone you're going to see a therapist because they associate that with weakness. Or they'll say, why are you talking about your business with a total stranger? So we see a therapist as a stranger, not somebody in my life that I can communicate with. So it's suck it up. You can handle it. And then there's a silence that shrouds mental illness in our community. So we don't communicate. We don't talk about what the encounter that I may have had that was traumatic for me yesterday. We learn to just not burden other people with our problems. And then there's a shame and fear of what other people might think. Will they ostracize me? Because remember, family community is very important to me. So I don't want to be ostracized from that which supports me. And so then we have also what's wrong. Less than 2% of therapists are African American. According to the American Psychological Association, 1.5% are African American. So, and then there's this huge mistrust of the medical and mental health community among Blacks. So African Americans are hesitant about opening up to professionals. And so there's also the case of racial disparities and the barriers of mental health treatment, which we'll talk about. So what needs to change in my community? We need to have an increased knowledge of mental illness, such as Bridges to Care is doing, so that we can change our beliefs and our fears can be calm. One writer wrote, education is the movement from darkness to light. And can I tell you today that we are moving from darkness to light because of education? So that we need more trained and licensed African-American counselors, therapists who can identify with us culturally what is happening to us. We need training and education for the Justice Department, police officers, and mental health institutions about what mental illness looks like for the African American community. We need trained counselors in low-income schools to address mental illness so it can be treated at a much earlier age. Black youth under 13 are twice as likely to die from suicide, to commit suicide. So we want to educate also the faith-based community about mental health illness, about mental illness among African Americans, because we African Americans are more likely to go talk to their faith leader than they would a therapist. But the problem is the faith leader oftentimes is not educated about mental illness. So they're unable to talk with them about what they're feeling or to share with them some principles that will help them. And so we need to reduce the inequities that contribute to mental illness in my community. Poverty, issues of poverty, systemic racism, police brutality that traumatizes us and continues to do so without any form of help to help us with the occurrences of such trauma. And I cannot do this presentation without discussing quickly, touching on ACEs and the African American community. I know many of you have heard of ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences. And the ACEs study was one of the largest investigations of childhood abuse and neglect ever. And it was done by CDC and Kaiser Permanente in 1995 to 1997. And it was initially started as an obesity study. It's very interesting. And I would like everyone to go, maybe today when you have some time, to look at Google acestoohigh.com. It's a remarkable story about the inception of the ACEs study. It's acestoohigh.com. It's a marvelous story. But his study revealed that adverse experiences in one's childhood were linked to every major chronic illness and social problem that the United States was spending billions of dollars on. It's fascinating. They came up with 10 factors that contribute to these social, mental, and physical problems. And the higher the score, the more likely areas of your life would be affected. So each factor would be 1 point. People who had an A score of 4 points, 390% likely to develop COPD, 12 times likely to commit suicide, 7 times more likely to be alcoholic, and 10 times more likely to inject street drugs. And that's only an A score of 4. People with high A scores are more likely to be violent, to have more marriages, more drug prescriptions, more cases of depressions. Most people have 1 or 2 points, because just about everyone has had some type of adverse incident in their lives. Most African Americans I know have ACE scores of 7 to 10 that they're living with. Imagine, that's only 4 that I read to you. This is 7 to 10. It's not what's wrong with us, it's what happened to us. So I recommend again that you go to that acestoohigh.com and read the story, the entire story. It's absolutely fascinating. But there are barriers to change. And these are some of the barriers that need to change. Poverty. African American families may not be able to afford counseling. They may have to choose between food and a therapist. And so we have to look at that. Health insurance. They may not have the health insurance access. They may not have the type of health insurance that covers therapy and treatment and for drugs and stuff like that. And then low income schools that do not provide counseling that children may need to improve their well-being. That's a barrier. African Americans are less likely to receive an accurate mental health diagnosis and less likely to receive treatment. Black men, for example, if they express issues of a mood disorder, they are more likely to be diagnosed as schizophrenic. So there's a cultural mistrust of healthcare and mental health professionals. And so there's a small number of Black mental health professionals. But it's a new day for African Americans and mental health, because along comes Bridges to Care, who are educating, training, empowering us about mental health, giving us the language. We can talk about mental health now because we have the language to describe what we are feeling. Bridges to Care is giving us hope that we have the power to change. So as they educate, so now we have in our communities wellness champions. They're all over in our communities, and they're people who can recognize and the signs and symptoms of mental illness. Some of them are going on to be certified mental health coaches, a training that's offered by the American Association of Christian Counselors. We are putting up mental health resources in our churches, or beauty and barbershops, or neighborhoods, or restaurants, or schools. We are empowered to these things. I mean, it's a great day. And we're starting Rafa Care Centers in churches where members of our community can come and get talk to a counselor at no charge. This is pre-crisis, family. And so we're developing forums where we can talk openly about mental health. Every Monday night for an hour, we did it last night. We were talking about mental health and African American men and the stigma they have to overcome. We are talking about this openly, where before there was utter silence. I am so excited about this. And we had 20% of the people that came on last night signed up to get additional training about mental health. It's a new day. So how can you help? How can you be a part of this movement? You realize that when you see an African American patient, by the time they get to you, they have overcome tremendous cultural hurdles to get to you. So that's something to celebrate. And we don't judge African Americans based on the stereotypes we have seen on TV. Because remember, I cannot heal you if I judge you. Continue to be professional when we show up. Everyone deserves to be treated with professional care and dignity. Make it a point to learn, like you're doing today, about African Americans and how we perceive life. We view life through the lens and experiences of intergenerational trauma, of historic trauma, of racism, inequities in every strata of life, whether it's social, economic, educational, physical. So empathize and be compassionate. Communicate to us. You're not alone. We're walking with you. That's music to our ears. That's what Bridges to Care has done. You're not alone. We're walking with you. We are side by side with you in this. Ask us the question, not what's wrong with us, but ask us, what happened to you? A new day is here. In the words of Nelson Mandela, or Marianne Williamson, whomever you choose, our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It's our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. A new day is here for African Americans and mental health. You are the ones we've been waiting for. A famous person once said, change will not come if we wait for some other person or some other time. We are the ones we have been waiting for. We are the ones we seek. Thank you so much for allowing me to make this presentation, and I'm open for questions if you have any.
Thank you so much, Veron. I love your passion. It's very admirable, and the information you gave was excellent. Clarissa says, great points, Veron, and wonderful resources to provide to everyone. She says she agrees that we should find our ACEs scores.
Yeah. Thank you.
Did I say that Veron was a pastor? Veron, thank you very much. That was just excellent. We had two great presentations this morning. It's hard to keep it going, but we're going to try with Elaine Ping. Shelby, were there any more questions in the chat?
No.
Okay. Should we move on?
Yes. There we go.
Okay, thank you. Elaine Ping is the founder, president, and CEO of the Mental Health Association for Chinese Communities. She worked as a Chinese teacher for more than 10 years, but since 2013, she has been dedicated to being a mental health advocate and educator, providing education to reduce public prejudice against mental illness, as well as decreasing stigma among caregivers. She has started 5 Chinese support groups and developed the first NAMI Chinese website at NAMIChinese.org in the United States. Elaine is a leader and developer of multiple mental health programs for the Chinese community. As a consumer and family member, she helps promote mental health services and provide peer support to the underserved Chinese community. She was the recipient of the 2016 NAMI Nationals Multicultural Outreach Award, and in 2017, NAMI California's Multicultural Outreach Award. She's a NAMI family-to-family class teacher, support group facilitator, connection recovery group facilitator, peer-to-peer mentor, basics class teacher, IOOV presenter. Wow. Thank you, Elaine, for being with us today.
Thank you, Don. Yes, yeah, I'm the founder of Mental Health Association for Chinese Communities. Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me to be here. Thank you, NAMI San Antonio. 10 years ago, my husband committed suicide at age 14. After that, my daughter was admitted to the hospital with psychosis and diagnosed with bipolar disorder. I planned to commit suicide with my daughter in despair. And last, I was diagnosed with depression and panic disorder. After I went through that hard days, I vowed to contribute all myself to help families with a similar situation. So I would like to introduce my board director, Henry Wong. He is a family member and he will do the presentation for us. Yeah, thank you, Harry.
Thank you, Elaine. Can anybody hear me? Great. My name is Henry Huang. I'm one of the board members of MHACC. I would like to show you a short video about us. Please, Shelby.
In Chinese culture, the stigma of mental health is very severe. causing major strain to families and communities across the nation. Studies have shown that Asian Americans have the lowest rate of receiving medical treatment for mental illness in the United States. Patients and family members don't know where to get help and fear the consequences of reaching out. In response to this crisis, the Mental Health Association for Chinese Communities, formed in 2012, has been serving the community through providing support groups, workshops, professional courses, and a helpline to all of those in need. All of our services are provided for free and have expanded to California and beyond. We have served over 800 families and organized more than 150 educational courses. Tens of thousands of people have benefited through our various programs and resources. We will not give up any opportunity to save a life and continue to spread mental health awareness to better the Chinese community. Thank you.
Thanks, Shelby. So as you can see on this chart, Asian is the ethnic group that least likely to use mental health service compared to the other. Only 4.9% Asian adults versus 16.6% white adults would seek help. Next. The main reason is that the widespread stigma in Asian communities, especially in Chinese culture, that admitting mental illness is shameful and would lose face. Next. Here's some of the Chinese words that probably you won't understand, but we use this in the Chinese language all the time. That it's supposed to be funny, but heavily stigmatize the mental illness subconsciously. Next. Similarly, these memes are widely used on social media, have the same effect. Next. Next. So MHACC's mission is to raise awareness of mental health within the Chinese community through education, support, and advocacy. Next. We use peer support education methods, which mean all of our teachers and facilitators has a first-hand experience coping with mental illness, either from being patient themselves or from the family members. Next. We educate and advocate by newsletter, TV programs, presentations, host support groups, etc. Next. And here are some of the pictures of our activities. Next. We also advocate for more mental health resource to public and the Asian communities and raise public awareness through supporting state propositions. Next. And next. Next. For the Chinese community, the biggest challenge other than treatment itself is to overcome stigmas and convince patient and the family to seek treatment. Oftentimes, both patients and their families will refuse to see doctors because it means they are admitting mental illness. Here, next. Here's a patient who at first refused treatment, and over the course of a few weeks, we were able to convince him and got him into the hospital, and he's now fully recovered. Next. We organize Chinese New Year celebrations and many other activities to overcome stigmas that mental health patients are shameful and can't live a normal life. We demonstrated to our community that mental patients are just normal people. Next. Over the last 3 years, we have gave more than 180 educational workshops and classes, and over 300 free support groups members meetings, helped more than 800 families, including my family, and we have successfully prevented 12 suicides in 2018, 31 in 2019, and 21 in 2020, and more actually in 2021. Next. Next. And so we were also, we were named in 2019 the California Nonprofit of the Year. Next. So during the pandemic, we reached out to our communities by doing the followings. Next. We set up 1-800 hotline, actually warm lines, to assist anyone in need. Next. We organize active social media, in particular WeChat group among patients and their families. Next. We have many online activities such as Zumba, yoga, Tai Chi, dancing, and singing. I personally very interested in music and singing, and I love that singing class to be provided once a week. Next. We also deliver food to people in need. Next. Next. We are currently developing 2 mobile apps, one for patients and one for the caregivers, and to help them reduce stress and report, with their own privacy, to communicate with us to reduce the stress. Next. We also joined the Care Hope Connect to help anyone who needs COVID-related emotional and mental health support. Next. Thank you for listening. Any questions?
Thank you so much, Elaine and Henry. We really appreciate you sharing that information. We have Dorothy Sang. She is a project coordinator from MHACC, and she says, thank you so much. And she learned a lot during this meeting and from this presentation.
Thank you.
Is there any other questions?
Elaine, do you want to add anything?
That's okay. Sorry, today I can talk more when I talk.
Yeah, Elaine lost her voice recently, and she would love to give presentation personally, but she's not able to today. So I'm the substitute, quote unquote, to speak for her.
Thank you so much, Elaine. We hope you feel better. We thank you for this information. Henry, you did a great job of delivering all of our presenters. We really appreciate all of you. You taught us a lot for Minority Mental Health Awareness Month. I think learning with different cultures, I think everyone learned something new. And I'm really excited to see the work that all of you are doing within your communities. We're here to advocate and support you all. And we're excited to see where the next steps lead you all in your communities. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. All right.
There are some questions coming up in the chat.
Okay.
One question is, what is the cultural response to grief and loss for the Chinese culture?
Elaine, do you want to answer that? Well, Elaine has, Elaine's husband died a few years ago, and I personally know Elaine for a few years. Generally speaking, Chinese like to hide our emotions and do not want to admit weakness and sadness. We pretend to be happy and do not seek help normally. That's our culture. But privately, our family is the key. In our culture, family and friends are the most important. So if our family would not support or understand the loss and grief, it's very difficult for that person who suffered. And oftentimes it's the main reason why people committed suicide. During the pandemic, it's very difficult for the whole community. That's why we want to extend our hand to our members actively without being passive, but we reach out to them by having warm lines, having constant daily social media communication with them to give them support. And also, most importantly, to tell their family members, get them involved, let them understand that mental health illness is not a sign of weakness, but it's actual illness that has to be treated. Oftentimes, we've seen patients, they don't know what to do, but their family do not want them to see doctors. In fact, one of the patients who is a girl from UC Davis, she had been sick for 5 years, but still she got very good grade from school. But just recently, she feels like someone's attacking her by illusion, and she got into violent action, and police was called, and that's why her family was contacted, and the family eventually had to send her to the hospital. We want to prevent that 5 years earlier. We want the family to be supported, and that's one thing we do to prevent suicide. So that's the long answer.
Henry, we have another question. How has COVID affected the dynamics of depression within your community?
Absolutely. It definitely affects us strongly. Most Asians stay at home and don't go out. And my parents have been at home for more than a year now. So we organized the music class, the sing-along, yoga class, Tai Chi. We encourage them to reach out. Many of the Chinese and Asian communities work in the service business, and in particular Chinese restaurants and supermarkets. They are severely hit financially, and we're trying to introduce them to some government help programs and basically give them hope, bring them the belief that it will be over and we'll stay strong at the end.
And also, I want to add one more is that in the COVID, the Asian crime already increased. Yeah, because we had that issues. So we will organize the Stop Asian crime, the Stop Asian AAPI hate the event to there to let the community to have them to had the safe space to share the feeling, and that's very important. Thank you, Harry. Sorry, Mike.
No problem. Yeah, we organize some of the marching and a support group in Oakland, California, Chinatown, San Francisco, Chinatown, to support the community, the businesses, and to bring out the awareness that Chinese are just like everybody else, shouldn't be hated. We are the victim also from the pandemic. We are not the reason or the cause of it. And we're trying to get government help, trying to let our police to know that when they respond to a 911 dealing with a mental health patient, there are a lot of homeless in Oakland, in our area, that are mentally sick. We try to bring up that police needs to be trained properly to respond to 911 when they come to respond of mentally sick person, to prevent any accidents or things that can happen.
And Henry, what's the vaccine rate in your community?
It's about 70%. It's going more. In the Asian family community, there are a portion of people that do not want to take vaccine because of the other stigma that Chinese medicines believe that our body will heal by ourselves by doing something else, not Western medicine. But in fact, that's not true. Everybody knows. But also a lot of Chinese are educated and they kind of understand. So the older generation, mainly the people who work in the service community, they don't want to take the vaccine because they don't have time, they have no resource, sometimes they don't even have car, they don't understand English, and they have no medical insurance. But another group of Chinese and Asian highly educated, working in high-tech companies, and they do take vaccine very quickly. So that's why we need to reach out to those people who are not being fully serviced.
Awesome. Thank you so much again, Henry and Elaine, for sharing those responses. We appreciate it. Thank you for everyone asking questions. We're just going to move on so we can wrap up the rest of our meeting. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you. So for next month, our next general meeting will be Tuesday, August 10th, and we will be having speakers from Bridges to Care. So as Veron mentioned in her slide, she talked a little bit about the work that Bridges to Care is doing. So we're really excited. Please come and join us next month. It's the second Tuesday, August 10th, where you can hear from speakers from Bridges to Care and learn more information about what they're doing. And we're really excited to have them. And then I'll have Janie, she's going to talk about our fun mindfulness event that's going to occur next Wednesday.
Please come join us as we learn to draw these deceptively simple tangles. Cut a 3.5-inch square of any paper and use a pen and pencil to draw them and have a great time and end up with a pretty pattern at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Janie. You can register for this event online. So you can visit NAMI-SAT.org and you can go to our calendar page and you'll be able to register for the event, and then an email will send you a Zoom link to join next Wednesday at 1:00 p.m. And then Doug will speak about our conference.
Yeah, I want to invite everybody to attend this year's Pathways to Hope conference. This will be the 6th year. It's August 27th and 28th. It's going to be virtual again. There's a banner on the NAMI San Antonio website where you can click on Pathways to Hope and you can register online, or you can just Google pathwaystohope.net for registration. There will be CEUs this year as well. And what I'd like to ask everybody to do is not only register, but pass the link around and encourage other people in San Antonio to come to the presentation. The speakers this year are going to be from across the United States and Texas and Bexar County. We have Dr. Tim Murphy, who was a congressman, authored the 2016 Family Caring Act. And he's going to talk about what has happened since 2016. We're very fortunate to have him as a speaker. Many, many other good speakers. Dan Gillison, who's the NAMI CEO. So anyway, please go. You can see who the speakers are and you can sign up, and please do so.
Thank you. And CJ will be talking about our NAMI walks.
Hi, everybody. What a great presentation and wonderful topics. I learned a lot. So thank you to our speakers. This is just a quick reminder that October 9th, we will be having a United Day of Hope, which is the weekend of World Mental Health Day, which is on the 10th, but October 9th is our walk. Registration has been open, so we're encouraging everyone to please join a team or create your own. We are going to go with a hybrid version this year instead of 100% virtual like we were last year. We are looking into participating at parks in addition, but there'll be more information provided on the website as we get more from national, but it should be a fun day. So please register, and captains that start their team between now and the end of July will receive a special prize. So get signed up right away.
Thank you, CJ. All right, thank you everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate you coming and hearing from our lovely speakers. And again, thank you to all of our speakers who taught us something new and advocated for your communities. We're really excited to see what the next steps are. And we hope to see all of you next month, August 10th, to hear from Bridges to Care at our next general meeting.
Shelby, there was a question in the chat about Pathways to Hope. Are these full days for Pathways to Hope? Doug, you may want to address that.
So Friday will be a full day from 9 to 3:30, 4 o'clock. But you can pick and choose. We'll have plenary speakers in the mornings like last year, and then workshops in the afternoon. So you can pick and choose what you want to go see. On Saturday, the primary sessions end around noon, but then we have networking sessions in the afternoon. Again, you can pick and choose what you'd like to see. So you don't have to attend the whole 2 days. You can attend the sessions that you'd like to see. And Shelby, if you'll allow me, just as we close, I want to thank Carol Hollins for all the work that she's done the last several years. And, you know, we're looking, and Marianne Moquin will be our interim program director moving forward while we do a search and take in applications. And I want to thank Marianne for taking on that role, but I especially want to thank Carol today. Also want to thank Verna Lister for helping coordinate our general meetings. And you can see the other people, Katie Martin, Lori Packard, Donald Sheldon, Jenny Swatzel, and Shelby. Thank you. Thank you all for a wonderful job. This has been one of the best general meetings I think I've been to. Outstanding speakers. Thank you for the work that you've done.
All righty. Thank you,
Thank you very
everybody.
much.
We'll see y'all next time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. See you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you to all our speakers. You were absolutely phenomenal. Oh my
Thank
goodness.
you for all the speakers too.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Lori, you want to stop the recording?